Ethan brushed his gloved hand over the soil, the back of his neck damp with sweat despite the crisp mountain air. It was his second week at Belle Hall, and something about the ground beneath this particular rose bush made him pause. The earth was looser here, darker, as if it had been recently disturbed and then hastily packed again. He pushed the spade deeper and struck something hard, not rock. Hollow, metallic. Slowly, carefully, he dug around it. What emerged was a rusted garden rake, half buried, the handle worn smooth by time, the metal curled and brittle. It looked decades old, forgotten, yet oddly out of place, as if it had been left there not by accident, but as a quiet mark of something no one wanted remembered. He wiped the sweat from his brow and stood, casting his eyes across the sprawling, overgrown garden. Belle Hall sat high on the hill, its wrought iron gates always closed, its hedgerows tall enough to muffle sound. The estate was beautiful, certainly, but it held a kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, watching. Ethan was 29, raised in Vermont, trained in horticulture in Tuscany. He had come to Belle Hall for solitude. And maybe, unconsciously, for reinvention. The job ad had been terse, live-in gardener needed, privacy valued, that was it, but the pay was good. And he needed the break. Belle, the owner, met him on the first day with a glass of wine in one hand and a pair of pruning shears in the other. She was striking, mid-40s. Dark auburn hair in a loose braid. Green eyes that never seemed to blink long enough. She carried herself like a woman used to being watched. And bored of it. "My husband passed," she said simply, 8 months ago. Heart failure. He didn't care for gardens. There were no children, no siblings, no daily staff, only a housekeeper who came twice a week and left before sunset. The rest of the time, Belle lived alone among the memories of someone she never spoke much about. Ethan found that curious. The house bore no signs of grief, no shrines, no untouched clothing, no signs of mourning, just that lush, wild garden wrapping itself around Belle Hall like ivy around a throat. He threw himself into the work, weeding, restoring stone paths, pruning overgrown shrubs that hadn't seen care in years. But everywhere he went, the soil felt wrong. Not dead, on the contrary. It was rich, damp, fertile, but too much so, as if it had been fed. Belle began to appear more often around dusk. She would come down barefoot, a shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, always holding a glass of wine that never emptied. Her voice was velvet, slow, slightly slurred, not with drunkenness, but with memory. "You're making it beautiful again," she said once, watching him plant new lavender. "I had forgotten what that feels like." He thanked her politely, kept his eyes on the soil, but something in her gaze lingered. It wasn't just admiration, it was hunger, not for him, necessarily, but for something deeper, something to anchor her. He caught himself watching her, too, despite the age gap, despite the circumstances. There was something magnetic about her sadness. She didn't cry, she didn't break, she drifted, like smoke from an unseen fire. One evening, as the sun slid behind the pines and cast long shadows across the lawn, Belle walked up beside him. He was kneeling by a patch of peonies, trimming deadheads. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, "Do you believe this place was once a Garden of Eden?" He looked up, one brow raised. Her face was unreadable. "If it was," he said, smiling faintly, "there were definitely a few snakes hiding in the trees." She laughed, a low, amused sound. It didn't reach her eyes. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The silence of Belle Hall had shifted, turned heavy, humid. He tossed beneath the thin sheets, the image of Belle's face behind his eyes. Just as he began to doze, the dream took him. He stood in the garden, barefoot, the air thick and warm. A figure emerged from the far end, a man, older, with a torn dressing robe, dried blood at the collarbone. His skin was gray, his eyes wide. He pointed at Ethan, spoke in a rasp that seemed to come from the soil itself. "She'll plant you too." Ethan woke with a start. Sweat soaked his shirt. The scent of roses clung to his sheets. Outside, the garden waited. And somewhere beneath it, something else waited too. Belle began appearing more often. It wasn't subtle, she made herself known, not with noise, but with presence. When Ethan worked beneath the arbor, she arrived barefoot, in flowing silk gowns that blurred the line between sleepwear and seduction. Her hair, always slightly damp at the ends, hung loose over her shoulders like ivy cascading from a forgotten wall. She never wore perfume, yet the scent of lilac and wine clung to her as though the house itself had exhaled her into the garden. She brought 2 glasses each time, one for herself, one for him. She would sip slowly, watching him from the wrought iron bench beneath the wisteria vines, saying little unless prompted. Her silences weren't awkward, they were curated, designed to make you want to fill them. And when she finally spoke, her words floated like dust motes through golden light, half confessional, half incantation. "My husband," she said once, swirling her wine in slow, hypnotic circles, "hated this garden. He said flowers were a waste of land. He liked cement, control." Ethan paused his raking, unsure if he should respond. Belle didn't seem to expect anything. She told stories not for comfort or catharsis, but to disrupt the silence that had grown too still, too deep. Her voice carried no sadness, only a resigned amusement, as if she had lived too long with ghosts to fear them anymore. "He was much older than me," she continued, "inherited his money, inherited his anger, too, I think. He didn't believe in softness, or seasons. Everything had to stay the same, forever." Ethan nodded politely, unsure what to do with the intimacy she offered so freely. There was no sorrow in her voice, just the cold clarity of someone who had turned pain into ritual. Still, he found himself thinking of her long after she drifted back into the house. He began to see the garden not just as overgrowth to tame, but as something sacred, an extension of her moods, her wounds. Every rose he pruned, every creeping vine he retrained, felt like a small offering, a way of saying, "I see what you survived." And she noticed. One late afternoon, while he was skimming algae from the koi pond, Belle appeared with a folded parchment in her hand. No words, just a soft gaze, and the paper passed into his palm. It was a sketch of the garden redrawn. New paths, hidden benches, arches wrapped in climbing roses. At the bottom, in ink delicate as breath, it read, "For the man who brought it back to life." She vanished before he could reply. That night, she invited him to the greenhouse. He stood at the threshold for a long moment. The glass was fogged from warmth and candlelight. Shadows moved like living things against the walls, vines twisting, flames flickering. When he stepped inside, the air was thick, pulsing with scent, damp earth, overripe figs, something floral and faintly sweet, almost medicinal. Candles ringed the space in a soft circle. It wasn't romantic, it was ceremonial. At the center, Belle sat on a low ottoman, her robe draped around her like smoke. A bottle of Cabernet open beside her, a platter of fruit untouched. She didn't speak, she only watched. When she rose, her movements were slow, not calculated, but reverent, as if she were approaching something sacred. Ethan stood still. He could have turned back, could have broken the spell, but he didn't. Their night together unfolded like a forgotten song, quiet, aching, laced with memory neither of them had lived, but both recognized. Her fingers traced his ribs like counting scars. His hands held her as if fearing she would disappear at dawn. No words passed, only breath and time. In the morning, Belle said nothing. She didn't meet his eyes, only brushed her fingers across his shoulder as he laced his boots, and whispered, "Bring everything back to life. Even me." He went to the rose garden. He worked harder than before, as though something inside him had broken loose and needed anchoring. The roses were tangled, dying, forgotten. He dug into their roots, charted new spaces, checked moisture levels, followed the blueprint she'd drawn. The third bush was stubborn. The soil clung to the shovel too tightly. Deeper, wetter, off in texture. When the blade struck something solid, he expected stone, but this wasn't stone. It yielded with a sickening give. Hollow. Wrong. He crouched, brushed the soil away with his gloves. What he unearthed was curved. Pale, unmistakably organic. A femur, long and smooth, weathered by time, clinging to it. A shred of navy cotton. Pajama fabric. He recoiled, heart racing, dropped the bone, stumbled backward into the dirt. In the silence, Belle's voice whispered back to him, not from memory, but from marrow. "You're the beginning, Ethan, not the end." The house loomed behind him, its windows wide and expressionless. The garden held its breath. And somewhere inside the soil, other roots stirred. Ethan wrapped the bone fragment in an old cloth, folding it carefully before slipping it into the bottom of his satchel. His hands shook, not with fear, at least not yet, but with the dawning weight of implication. The ground hadn't lied, something had been buried there. And not something small. He didn't go back to the house. Not right away. Instead, he walked briskly down the gravel path toward his truck parked beyond the south gate. The sun was high and sharp, but the air felt weighted, like the sky had thickened with something unspeakable. He turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine didn't even cough. Frowning, he stepped out and circled the vehicle. The rear tire was flat. Not a leak. Slashed. He looked around. No one. Just the rustle of leaves. Birds gone quiet. He pulled out his phone, hands already dialing the local sheriff's number, but there was no service. 0 bars. He walked closer to the main house, hoping for Wi-Fi. Still nothing. The router's signal, which usually blinked green from the front parlor, was now dark. That was when he heard her voice. "Did you find something interesting, Ethan?" He turned. Belle stood just behind him, one hand on the porch railing, a glass of wine already in the other despite the hour. She was barefoot again, her dress a shade of ivory that turned translucent in the sun. Her smile was soft, curious, timeless. Ethan forced a breath. "Just digging. Old soil." She hummed, stepping closer. "Funny what the earth holds on to." She gestured toward the door. "Come inside. It's too hot to pretend we're not thirsty." He hesitated, then followed. Inside, everything was cooler, dimmer, curtains drawn just enough to let in gold-streaked shadows. She poured 2 glasses of wine and led him to the dining room, where the table had already been set for 2. He hadn't noticed when she had time to prepare it. Roasted lamb, figs, crusty bread, a wedge of cheese sweating in the warmth. "Do you believe," she said, cutting into the lamb with practiced ease, "that some flowers need blood to bloom?" Ethan paused, fork in hand. She smiled, chewing slowly. "Just something I read once." The conversation moved like mist, never quite settling on anything. Belle spoke of books she hadn't finished, travels she might have taken, paintings that once hung in the house but had since disappeared. Her tone was dreamy, lilting, as though the present were only a whisper between memories. That night, after she retreated to her wing, Ethan went to the old study at the end of the east corridor. The door creaked when he opened it, revealing a room cloaked in dust and old paper. Shelves sagged under the weight of yellowing ledgers and journals. One, in particular, caught his eye, small, leather-bound, tied shut with brittle twine. Inside were pages written in a tight, angular hand. The entries were dated from a year ago, the last year of Belle's husband. Ethan read, "She watches me in the garden. I don't sleep anymore. There are things missing. Books, bank slips, my pills. She says the vines grow faster when I'm angry. The roses like my blood. If something happens to me, dig beneath the 3rd bush, the one that never dies." Ethan closed the journal with trembling fingers. The urge to run clawed at his spine. He grabbed his bag, rushed to the truck, and tried to start it again out of sheer desperation. Still dead. He circled the back of the estate, past the greenhouses, toward the outer fence. It was chained, not just locked, but bolted with fresh iron links, as though someone knew he might try. He slept in the greenhouse, not out of comfort, but because it was the only place with glass walls, where nothing could hide. He placed the wrapped bone beneath his head like a relic, or a warning. His fingers clutched it even in sleep. And sleep did come, but not peace. In the dream, the man returned, the one in the robe. Only this time, he reached for Ethan, his hands cold and slick, as though pulled from deep earth. Blood ran from his eyes like tears. "She planted me," he whispered, voice cracked and full of rot. Then he smiled. "And now she's planting you." Ethan awoke to the thick scent of damp soil and something sweeter, rotting petals. Crushed stems. The breath of 1,000 living things held captive beneath glass. The air clung to his skin, heavy and humid. He tried to move but found his arms bound tightly to the sides of a wrought iron chair. The metal was cold, the bindings were rough twine, biting into his wrists and ankles. He blinked, disoriented. All around him, the greenhouse bloomed in chaos. Ferns curled over broken pots. Orchids spilled from hanging baskets. Vines grew rampant, twisting like veins. It was no longer a garden. It was a jungle with a pulse. And in the center of it all stood Belle. She wore black, a dress of silk so dark it caught no light, only shadow. Her bare feet made no sound as she moved, ghost-like, through the foliage. In her hand, a single glass of wine, deep red. Too rich to be anything but ominous. "I didn't want it this way," she said, voice calm, almost mournful, "but beauty asks for sacrifice." Ethan struggled against the twine. "Belle, please, don't beg," she interrupted gently. "It ruins the dignity. You've seen the garden. You know what it demands." He shook his head, panic mounting. "I won't say anything, I swear to you. I'll leave. I'll disappear." She tilted her head, studying him like one of her roses under threat of pruning. "They all say that," she said, "right before they vanish." She stepped closer, kneeling beside a nearby planter. From behind a sack of mulch, she pulled a small cloth pouch. She untied it slowly, delicately, as if performing a ritual she knew by heart. Inside, fragments of broken glass, twisted metal, and what looked like the shattered face of a wristwatch. Ethan's stomach dropped. She held up the largest shard, watching it catch the dim light. "This was Martin's," she said. "He never took it off. Not even when he slept. But plants don't need time. They need blood. And patience." Ethan's breath came fast. He remembered the bone, the journal, the dream, the cold hands pulling him down. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. Belle's eyes softened, but not with pity, with reverence. "I do," she said. "The garden is alive because of what it's been given. You felt it, didn't you? You made it bloom." He shook his head. "It's madness. It's legacy." She moved behind him. He heard the sound of a syringe, metal clinking against glass. The hiss of liquid drawn. He bucked against the chair, kicked out blindly. She was unfazed. "If you love me," she said, "you'll understand. You won't betray what we built." Her voice had changed. It was no longer soft. It was the voice of roots cracking stone. The needle slid into his neck. Cold fire spread through his veins. His last vision before the darkness took him was of Belle lifting a small trowel, her eyes shining with something close to joy. In the slow bleed of dawn, Belle stood in the garden with a shovel. Her movements were steady, practiced. She dug beneath the third rose bush, the one that always bloomed redder than the others. When the hole was finished, she gently placed a single tag beside the base of the plant. It was handmade, ink on soft wood, tied with a string of black ribbon. "Rosa Ethan." And for the first time in days, the roses swayed without wind. Ethan came to in darkness. Not the soft velvet dark of sleep, but a choking, crushing black that pressed against his chest and burned in his throat. His body was stiff, cold, every breath was a struggle, a wet gasp against the weight above him. Dirt filled his mouth, clogged his nose, packed against his eyelids. The pressure was unbearable, heavy, wet, final. He was underground. Panic came in pulses. He kicked, arms bound, twine soaked through. He twisted, screamed, a strangled sound that died an inch from his lips. The soil was thick, clay-like, rich with decay and moisture. Alive. Above him, the world moved on. There was a rhythm, a sound, the crisp metal chime of a spade slicing into dirt. He froze. Through the faint layers of soil and suffocation, he could hear her breathing, steady, calm, whistling. Belle was gardening, planting, singing something, maybe a lullaby. Something old and wordless. Each shovel of earth she moved above him felt like a bell tolling. Not for him, for a ritual completed. She spoke to someone, herself. Maybe, or to the flowers. "Let's place you right here," she murmured, "next to the lavender. You'll like the sun in the morning, and the shade by tea time." There was no rage in her voice. No guilt, only the satisfaction of order, of control returned to her world. Ethan, now silenced and absorbed, had become another layer in the fertile memory of her garden. From above, the rose beds were perfect, laid out in even rows, symmetrical, like a graveyard where the tombstones had been replaced with blossoms. Each rose bush marked a story, a betrayal, a forgetting. Belle moved with grace among them, watering, pruning, humming softly. Classical music drifted from a small speaker nearby, something stringed and mournful. Bach or Brahms, filling the greenhouse like incense. Inside the house, tucked between the pages of an old photo album, lay a faded picture. Belle, years younger, beaming beneath the same arbor, her arm around a young man in a gardener's uniform. His hair was different, but the face was the same. Not Ethan, but impossibly close, a twin in time, or a pattern. The sun rose higher, the garden drank its light. And at the wrought iron gate, a new figure appeared, a young man with calloused hands, a leather satchel, boots still wet with morning dew. Belle greeted him with a warmth so precise it felt like muscle memory. "You must be Daniel," she said, reaching for his hand. "Welcome, the garden's been waiting for you." She turned, leading him down the path past the rosebeds. As they walked, the camera would drift downward, past the lace of roots, past the tangled web of worms and stone, until it reached a small placard, pressed deep into the soil beneath the newest bush. The name, written in elegant cursive, Rosa Ethan. A breeze passed, the petals above trembled, and the soil pulsed. Then, silence. A black screen, a voice. Belle's, soft, timeless. Some beauty must be buried. Then the sound of the shovel again, scraping. Steady, unhurried. Over and over, as if the garden would never be full.